Thank you very much. Andre, thank you very much for that presentation, very concise and straight to the point. Just to point you in the direction of the World Bank output-based aid, that's been used very successfully to extend network to low-income families.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. No, I'm Andre. Oh, yeah.
He's
Oh, sorry.
yeah.
Yeah, the social fund thing has been very well used. The other point I was going to make, I don't know if it's very relevant to the current panel, is that yes, it's good to promote private sector initiatives. It's good to promote social initiatives, but I hear very little about government in the conversations we've had this afternoon. And I just wonder, it appears like we're jetting into countries, doing our own thing, and expecting it to scale up. Those countries are not run as backyards of our premises. They have governments elected by their people in some places. So how do we want to interact with municipal authorities, the existing water utilities? Yeah. How does our scheme of things play with these chaps? Some of the utilities actually have autonomy. You can't come as a private sector person and do anything in some of these countries without breaking the law. Some of the countries, we were talking about standards earlier. What standards do you use? I'm surprised that several of us don't even know the standards in the countries we are targeting. These countries have water quality standards. They have regulators. They have, so it appears like some of these are very, they are working because they are in small scale in some instances. They are pilots. Maybe they are away from the radar of governments, but they immediately is beginning to get into the mainstream. You're going to just crash because the governments will come very hard on you.
All right. I'll take one more and then I'll sort of rephrase them and distribute them to the group. Yeah?
Hi, I had a question about the social impact bonds. It sounds like such a great idea that you just pay for the outcome. What do you think is the main problem with this, and why is this not much bigger?
All right. So I kind of got a few areas from those questions. It seems that there's one in particular around the outcome-based financing, kind of working backwards, and that touches on both of these two questions. And I wonder if, and I think as we're looking at that question, I'm actually going to ask Andre and Andrea to comment, because they're both looking at non-traditional financing streams. One is crowdfunding, or broad-based using an internet funding model, and the other is, using new approaches that donors and others are putting in. So for Andrea, I wonder if you could comment on the World Bank's and other approaches that you have kind of looked at as you're developing that. But then also for both of you, really, as you see more experimentation now with new financing models, what sort of dreams do you have for how that can help your respective, or particularly yours, Andre, grow? Yep.
Okay, cool. So I think if I start with the challenges and come back to the government and then also the interaction with the kind of output-based aid programs, I think in terms of the challenges, a big difference from developing countries and developed countries is data. So here, a lot of social sector organizations, government organizations have a lot of data. Unfortunately, that's often not as well collected, we find, on a lot of our programs. And so one of the ways that we deal with that is often through pilots, through kind of grant-funded programs first that are focused on kind of building up the data, because you can't pay on outcomes if you don't have any data about how people have previously performed. I think a kind of second challenge is that a lot of donors are very well-established large organizations, and it can obviously it's a bit of a process working through all of the different, departments to bring in a different type of instrument. So I think that's always a kind of longer-term, multi-stakeholder-like kind of conversation. And so I think that's often sometimes has been the cause of delays in different projects. I think in terms of output-based aid, I think this really is, in a way, the next generation of output-based aid. I think a lot of our models use a combination of outputs and outcomes. And so what we do try to I guess what that requires us to do is to secure longer term timeframes. So for the sleeping sickness in Uganda, you're looking at an investment period of more like 10 years, over which you can actually get to the outcome. Obviously, that means it's not a pure outcomes basis, because it's quite expensive to not pay back your investors for 10 years. So we use a combination, but we hope that having that ultimate outcomes focus where that's possible makes sure that you're building up towards it. I think in some cases outputs are more appropriate, where it's quite clear how you're going to achieve it's quite clear what the relationship is between the output and the outcome. I think where it's less clear, that's where it's more important to incorporate some of the outcomes.
Can you speak it?
Yeah, so if we're talking about output or outcome-based aids, then that really is, it's sort of almost the opposite financing flow to where Elliot for Water is, because Elliot for Water starts at the front end of the project, right? And so I guess as you look forward, are you looking at other financing streams to help the growth?
No, not really, because we based all the project on the fact that people can help for free and can help without making extra effort or with money or time. So the business model will be always this one. Even with the partners that we have, we will not ask money to work with us. We just look for collaboration. We want to be sustainable by ourselves. Then of course, if you come and you tell me I have 100 euros, if I want to give it to you, I don't say no, but give me 100 euros and I can buy something more and help the project grow. But technically, we will keep the project as it is with the free donation, like this.
Okay, good, thanks. So then we'll turn to the other two questions that we received before, and that'll be going down to the other end of the table. So, Mariana, there was specifically the question on the gaps. As you did that I really liked that analysis, by the way, of the full social enterprise down to the range of scales as which the private sector is involved. I thought that was a really useful analysis. But so I hope you can touch on the gaps, and then I'd hope that both of you, because I think, Carolyn, Unilever also works so extensively with government at all different levels, that really I think you'd be really well placed to comment on this. In this panel in particular, we've said so much about private sector and maybe less focused on the mechanisms by which that collaboration with different governments is happening. So,
I think so. In terms of what the mapping exercise showed was, and perhaps maybe I can have a sort of a more in-depth conversation with the lady afterwards, because it's really, there's quite a lot to talk about. But if we look sort of in terms of sanitation, for example, what we uncovered is that many of the kind of businesses involved in certain parts of the value chain were just social enterprises, and for whom the sustainability of the businesses wasn't being achieved because of scalability. And that's just an example. For example, on the water side, what you had lots of small-scale private sector providers providing networked and non-networked services. But then at the end of the scale, you have mostly of the fully commercial, large-scale water utilities very much focusing on sort of markets that are easier to reach. So our argument was that, combine both of them at either side of the scale. And then in terms of hygiene, what we also uncovered, and we were looking mostly at the menstrual hygiene supply chain, was very much that you had all these small-scale social enterprises, sole traders, really involved in the production of, for example, sanitary pads, but also in terms of its distribution. But when it came to actually market those products, they had no ability of doing so. And this is actually where then you could link up with, larger companies that might have a sort of might have different mechanisms of activating that marketing. So that was in terms of the gap. But there's a lot more. And I mean, what the report also provides you is not just with the gaps, but opportunities, challenges, and obstacles. So it's just really sort of navigates.
So what's the role of the government in those private sector collaborations then, to get that second question?
Yeah, so we see this at two levels. If you talk about private sector engagement at a global level, then we would definitely say that the mechanism through which this can be achieved is through sanitation and water for all, because this is the only global platform where you actually have country governments represented and talking to different civil society organizations and now with the private sector. And if you're sort of planning to go to actually have quite a top high-end conversations, then this is the space to go, because you'll be able to actually be part of the discussion around national wash strategies. And then at the domestic level, you know, there is clearly a very important role to be played around regulation, around ensuring that standards are being kept, and above all, ensuring that prices, affordability, universal access are really well embedded on any sort of initiatives that might exist. That would be my take on it.
Thanks.
So I think, you know, in terms of gaps in the private sector, I think we're still catching up. So, you know, until not so long ago, the word toilet or sanitation wouldn't even be mentionable at United Nations, and now, you know, it is. It's recognised as a World Toilet Day is recognised, and it's recognised within the SDG framework. So I do think we're still playing catch up. I think there are gaps in terms of technology. It's clear that, you know, if everybody has a Western European flush toilet, then we're probably not be the most sustainable solution for the world. And those technologies for converting, you know, waste into fertilizer, waste into energy, waste into fuel are out there, but not yet technology ready to bring to scale. And I think that, you know, where we need to move from is from, you know, doing small pilots to actually bringing some of these programs to scale as quickly as we can. And I think in terms of interaction with governments, you know, again, the private sector probably wouldn't have had so much interaction in relation to WASH with government. I think that's changed completely now. We're at the table, we have a role, and each respects, you know, that we can't do this on our own. So yeah, I think it will take time, but you know, I was at Africa Sun this year, for example. I've seen a huge shift at Africa Sun this year compared to 3 years ago, you know, where big changes are being made by government, and there's a lot more interaction with all of the partners who are at the table.
Great. Well, I think as much as we have many questions that we'd like to do, we'll have to retire now and close for the day. So I'm sure that we can all, you know, have more questions afterwards, but let's now turn back to Marianne for some concluding comments.